but have a high and correct priority. You've got to get rid of the malignancy in the White House. And they felt, African Americans and women, particularly two major constituencies, seemed to feel that Sanders would not be able to put together a broad enough coalition to win the election. You can debate this. I mean, maybe right, maybe wrong, but it's not an unreasonable conjecture. There was another factor. Young people who support Sanders didn't vote.
No.
That's that's a big loss. He was hoping to get a surge of new voters, which would be mainly young people who strongly support him. But apparently they were too busy with their iPads.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what happened. Yeah. I was just looking at the National Review. Rich Lowry referred to Bernie Sanders as the opinion piece was called "Are You Ready for President Noam Chomsky?" Did you see that?
As what?
There's a National Review article written by Rich Lowry, one of the editors, and it's entitled "Are We Ready for President Noam Chomsky?"
Actually, you hear that all the way over to people like Paul Krugman, people the left of the mainstream spectrum, who say, yeah, I think his ideas are fine, but the American people aren't ready for it, which is a very interesting criticism. Because take a look at his proposals. Universal medical care, free higher education, those are the two main ones. Every other major country has those. So what these people are saying is the United States is such a primitive, backward society that it can't rise to the level of comparable societies. Well, maybe that's true, but that's the kind of condemnation of the United States you might expect to hear from Russian propaganda. And that's the left of the spectrum in the United States. They don't seem to understand what they're saying. What's so remarkable about doing what everyone else in the world does? I mean, every other developed society and most others have universal health care. Free higher education is everywhere. Next door in Mexico, Finland, which comes out first, and educational testing every year. Germany, France, almost everywhere. So the United States can't rise to that level.
In fact, didn't we used to have free college in California, right? Wasn't it Reagan who sort of
everywhere. In the 1950s, higher education was essentially free. It was called the GI Bill.
And my father went to Penn on the GI Bill.
Yeah, I was at Penn. I was a little too young to have been a soldier, but most of the fellow students were former soldiers. It was kind of interesting for me because I was a 16-year-old kid, and these guys looked like ancient people, 25 or something. That was another universe. It was very good for me because in the psychology lab, I had my partner was a ex-GI, and we had to do things that I just couldn't do, like cut up a frog. But he had no problem with it, so I was able to pass psychology. But the point is, it was not only free, but they got subsidized. And it was very good for the country. It was very good for them, obviously. But I was, I just was a kid from high school. Tuition at Penn when I got there was $100 a year.
Wow.
And you could easily get a scholarship. I had a scholarship, so I went free. Okay. I mean, that's what the country, and it was a much poorer country then, remember. We're a much richer country now than we were then. So there can't be any economic reason for this. I think it has totally different reasons.
I've talked to some Democrats, and they've said, why should I paid for my college tuition, why should I give it to somebody for free? Or with healthcare, they say, it won't be high quality healthcare, if it would be sort of.
Actually, the US has about the lowest quality healthcare in the OECD, has twice the expenses and some of the worst outcomes. You look at, I mean, it's true that if you're privileged and wealthy, you can get very high quality healthcare. But incidentally, that's a joke too. I mean, I've lived in Boston all my life, the best
Right.
hospitals in the country. I've had some fairly serious surgery a couple times over the last 40 years. I mean, the surgery itself is very high quality, but the treatment is awful. This is the best hospitals, the top ones, the university hospitals, Brigham and Women, Mount Auburn, where all the elite go and so on. I mean, like in Mount Auburn, I had to have a fairly serious spine operation, a couple discs removed. And I was in a ward with 8 men. There was one nurse who was also busy with other wards. I had to have a spot on the back where the surgery was going to be. There had to be swabbed by some antiseptic at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was on a walker. I could barely move,
Wow.
horrible pain. The nurse came by and she said, "Sorry, I'm too busy. You have to do it yourself." So somehow I managed to get into a shower with great pain and put the swab on my back and managed to get by with the walker with the IV in me and stuff. I mean, that's the best.
And you have the best coverage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, after the surgery, I was kind of waking up from, from the what do you call it, the anesthesia. I was on a gurney in the hall outside, and I was waking up. I was dying of thirst. I tried to get somebody to get me a drink of water, but I must have been there for 45 minutes. Everybody who went by was too busy. I mean, that's the best hospital in the country. So yes, the surgery is very high class, but the treatment is, like a third world country.
Wow.
And of course, if you're poor, it's far worse. You go into the emergency room at Mass General, the best hospital. It's pathetic. People sitting there for sometimes days trying to get somebody to pay attention to, terrible headache or something. So the idea that it's high quality is just a joke. In fact, the system is set up on a business model, which means you have to have what's called efficiency, not any single thing extra. So if everything's perfect, it works fine. Slightest thing goes wrong, like a nurse has too much to do, you're in real trouble. And that's what's causing the problem now.
This is why we weren't prepared, you'd say, for the coronavirus, because of a sort of neoliberal capitalist medical system.
I mean, you run a hospital the way you do an auto plant. You're going to get, if assembly line stops for a couple minutes on the Ford plant, nothing terrible happens. If it stops in a hospital, you got a catastrophe. We can thank Milton Friedman, Ronald Reagan, and other guys for that.
You're saying the whole idea of neoliberalism started maybe in the 1920s in Vienna.
That's correct.
I heard you. I was just listening to another interview you did with someone else. So. Could you talk about that? The relationship between neoliberalism and authoritarian regimes too?
Well, the guru, the main figure was Ludwig
Hayek too.
Yeah, von Mises was the main.
Oh, von Mises.
Hayek and others, and they were in Austria. They were very happy with the Austro-Hungarian Empire because it didn't interfere with what they call sound economics, which is the only thing that matters. And it was a kind of a free trading area, of course, very brutal and autocratic, but who cares about that? After the war, First World War, Austria the countries broke up. Austria, where they were, had a social democratic government, strong labor movements. They were crushed by violent state intervention with a proto-fascist government. Von Mises couldn't overcome his euphoria. He was delighted with, they had helped preserve sound economics. Labor unions and social democracy interferes with the market. Like labor unions try to get better rights for workers. It's a market interference. Can't have that. So if a fascist government comes in and smashes unions, it's fine. And it all became completely obvious under Pinochet. Their first chance to really impose neoliberal principles was under the Pinochet dictatorship. And it was a perfect experimental conditions. Nobody could protest. Torture chambers took care of that. They had money pouring in from the United States, the World Bank, and so on, every possible advantage. And they were smart enough not to close the source of Chile's economic wealth, a nationalized copper company, Codelco, which was producing the main wealth for the country. It was very efficient. So they forgot their principles, put them aside, and let that keep running. In fact, everything was perfect. In about 5 years, they crashed the economy. The state had to take it over. Nobody talks about that. But this is the perfect experimental conditions. Doesn't affect anything. We've got our principle, sound economics, whatever that. Sound economics means the market is perfect. So if I have $1 billion and everybody else has $10, the perfect market produces luxury yachts for me and a bag of potato chips for anyone else. That's sound economics.
Speaking of, hospitals here in Philadelphia, I remember Bernie came here, was trying to keep Hahnemann University Hospital open, but it was sold to some guy he's like a real estate developer. And when the virus started, I know the mayor was trying to get it reopened so they could, serve more people, but he refused to. I think he's going to make condominiums or something out there.
It's normal.
Yeah.
That's good economic reasoning. Actually, a place where you could put plenty of patients are the Trump hotels.
Oh,
they're all empty. You got plenty of beds.
I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for open them up. So we're left with basically Joe Biden. Isn't he also sort of neoliberal? I know you said this is the most consequential election probably in human history.
Yeah. Biden's nothing to rave about. I mean, first of all, he's pretty much cognitively impaired.
Yeah, I think so.
Term, if he's elected, policies will be made by the people around him, whoever they are.
He put out a list of people he'd bring in. I think Jamie Dimon, and those types of.
I suppose it's Jamie Dimon, not my favorite person, but he's infinitely better than Trump. Infinitely better. I mean, almost anything you can think of is better than this maniac. He's actually driving us to destruction. The people who refuse to vote for him, like a lot of the left is doing, aren't thinking. I mean, you have another 4 years of Trump on global warming. You may be past tipping points. We may have a nuclear war. Even if you look domestically, the courts will be so packed with young ultra-right maniacs that nothing will be possible for a generation. I mean, the guy is a real super danger, not just him, but Mitch McConnell and the other guys who are part of his entourage. It's they're going to destroy the world. You can vote for anybody who's better.
Because they're You're right. Because I was a huge Bernie supporter, and I've noticed some of the people I've met on social media that they said they can't vote for Biden because of there were sexual assault allegations against him recently, and
Suppose it's true. I mean, is sexual assault 30 years ago worse than destroying human civilization?
you're not one given for hyperbole. So for
No,
you to
I'm
say
not.
that, you said it'll be the end of organized
It
human
is.
life on Earth.
It's not just me. There was a very interesting memo that just leaked
Oh yeah, the
during
Chase
what? The
Chase Bank.
JP Morgan Chase,
Oh, J.P. Morgan Chase.
Jamie Dimon's bank, internal memo to investors said that the bank's policies of funding fossil fuels are putting the survival of humanity at risk. Okay, that's the biggest bank in America. They know.
I know you've been asked this before. Don't they have to live on the planet too? Why, is there short-term profit over?
That's exactly right, but they've known it all along. Jamie Dimon's no fool, knows as much about global warming as we do. But, you've got to live by making profit tomorrow. What happens down there? It's the same with the coronavirus. I mean, in 2003, the drug companies knew perfectly well what every scientist was telling them, including their own. Another major pandemic is coming. It'll probably be a coronavirus. Did they prepare for it? No, it's not our business if a catastrophe is going to come. Our business is making sure we have profit tomorrow. And that's capitalism, okay? Yes, it's a lethal system. It can be controlled, like the Salk vaccine. I mean, when I was a kid, polio was a terror. I mean, I remember in the summer, people were afraid to go to the beach. Children were dying. So, well, it was cured by a government-initiated, government-sponsored program and no patent. Jonas Salk refused to take a patent.
Should be as free as the sun, you said, right?
Yeah, well, that's it's capitalism, but a kind of a semi-sane, regimented capitalism. Before the neoliberals managed to take over and turn it into a total monstrosity.
Was neoliberalism, was that a term coined by David Harvey? Is it?
No,
Or no? Okay.
they called it neoliberalism.
Oh, they call it neoliberalism.
In fact, the term, I think, was first used in 1938. Around it. Even there's some go back even earlier. The point is, they were not trying to restore the old liberal order, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which they loved. They were going to try to adapt it to new situations. So it was neoliberalism.
And here, in the United States, it started with Reagan, would you say? Ronald Reagan?
Well, it was starting to be, it started in the late 70s. The system of regimented capitalism was eroding, but it really took off with Reagan. His inaugural speech, government is the problem, it's not the solution. Let's turn everything. It's funny how people couldn't understand what that means. What's government? Government is something that's at least partially accountable to the population. If government isn't making the decisions, who is? Private corporations. Are they accountable to the population? Zero. I mean, they are pure tyrannies, which are totally unaccountable except to themselves. And Milton Friedman chimed in and said, corporate managers have only one duty: to increase the wealth of the corporation, to enrich the shareholders, who are very rich, most of them. So that's the duty. And government can't intervene, which is a joke, because every time they have a problem, they plead with the government to bail them out. Started right away with Reagan when he bailed out big failing bank, went on. Happening again right now. What's happening now? You take a look at what's happening now. So the airline industry is asking for $50 billion. Why do they need $50 billion? The reason is that during the orgy of profit making since 2009, they have not been developing their businesses. They've been buying stock to inflate stock prices for their shareholders, but also for management. So they've been interfering with the market to inflate stock, to inflate their own salaries and management bonuses and so on. And now they're pleading, it's about $50 billion. Now they're pleading with the nanny state to give it back to them. Now, before Reagan, that was illegal. Couldn't do it.
Stock buybacks.
Couldn't do it. And the Treasury enforced it, so it didn't happen. Reagan opened the spigots because government is the problem. Same with tax havens. They have tens of trillions of dollars. Apple has a small office in Dublin somewhere, so it doesn't have to pay taxes. That's Reagan. Before Reagan, tax havens were illegal and it was enforced. Okay, that's tens of trillions of dollars we're talking about, not small change. Other things have happened under neoliberalism. So the financial institutions, which now overwhelmingly dominate the economy. I mean, BlackRock has tens of trillions of dollars and just half owns the economy. None of this was around pre-Reagan. Banks were working for the real economy. Your bank is a place where you put in money if you had something you didn't use, and they'd lend it to somebody to buy a car or something. Changed radically with the neoliberal system. Now it's basically financial institutions run the place.
Yeah.
And they repeatedly get into trouble and crash the economy. It's happened over and over, each time worse than the last. Each time the taxpayer bails them out. Obama was the last. Okay.
With the automobile, the GM, right? He also bailed out.
Well, Obama virtually nationalized the auto industry. There were a couple of things that could have been done. One is to just hand it back to their former owners, maybe new faces, but the same system, have them producing more cars. There was another possibility. Hand it over to the workforce and let them produce what we need, which is not new cars, it's mass public transportation. That was a possibility. If there had been public pressure, it might have happened. But it's not going to happen. If you don't have public pressure, then there's one group in the country that's constantly, relentlessly fighting class war, the business classes, the dedicated Marxists. They never stop from class war for an instant. They're doing it right now. So right now, I don't know if you paid attention to this, but Trump in February came out with the most amazing budget proposals. Pandemic's raging. He was denying it, but everybody else knew it.
He said, just don't, just sneeze into your elbow and don't touch your face.
Everyone else knew it. Everyone around him, certainly. What's the budget? Cut down on funding for the Center of Disease Control, something he'd been doing throughout his whole term, and for any health-related part of the government. Cut funding, but increase funding for fossil fuel subsidies. I mean, it's as if these guys are, dedicated sociopaths. Let's harm everybody in the world as badly as we can. Of course, more for the military and for his wall. That's mid-February. So these guys, and at the same time, his EPA, which is now just run by corporate polluters, decided to lower restrictions on emissions. So we'll kill a lot more people. It's terrific.
I remember, go ahead.
This is worse than Hitler Germany. It really is.
Oh yeah, you've said that too. This is the worst. The GOP is the worst political organization in history.
I can't get anybody to listen, but it's obviously true. Hitler wasn't trying to destroy organized human life on Earth.
Because I thought Bush and Cheney were pretty bad,
But
but
not
it
like this.
seems like it just gets worse. They get worse every 4 years. They find somebody else.
I mean, Bush, whatever you think of him, he had a certain resemblance to human beings. And not Trump doesn't. He's
No,
off
he
the
really
spectrum.
doesn't.
But and Trump and Bush did some very good things, which he doesn't get credit for.
Oh,
Bush's AIDS program in Africa saved millions of people. It's the
oh,
best
okay.
health program ever. You can't imagine Trump doing anything like that.
No. So yeah, we have to pick Biden. What was it gonna? Oh, the WHO. He's defunding them as well.
That's a good move for him. It'll kill a lot of people, and it may slightly improve his election chances. So that's fine. Why not?
For this, for the coronavirus, I don't know if you said this stat. One person dies every 40 or so seconds in the United States. How did we came? I mean, we really are exceptional in some of the worst ways. We're now have the most cases in the world, and
We do.
even compared to China, where it's kind of shocking to me. So some people have said that maybe China's lying about their numbers.
It may be. In the United States case, we don't know because the United States under Trump is the one country that is so dysfunctional, can't even provide statistics. So we don't know in the United States. Yesterday, we learned that Britain has been underestimating deaths by about 10%. Uh, but, you know, maybe China is. I mean, we don't know for sure. Medical specialists don't see any particular evidence for it. And it's not clear why they should be. What do they gain out of it? I mean, by early January, they had provided all the relevant information. They had identified the source of the virus, they had sequenced the genome, provided the information to the entire world, and countries that are functional paid attention. So the East Asian countries immediately reacted. They all have it under control. And New Zealand seems to have quashed the virus totally.
Hmm.
The United States in the hands of a freak show. So they claimed it wasn't happening. Now they're trying to blame somebody else.
You
I
said
mean,
Germany's doing a pretty good job too, Angela Merkel.
Germany's done a good job for itself, but it doesn't give any aid to the northern Italy right across its border. Fortunately, northern Italy can get aid from Cuba, not from Germany. Yeah. So yeah, they did a good job for themselves. Tells you what the European Union amounts to.
That's funny because Bernie, got in a lot of trouble for just saying, "Oh, he thought Cuba had a really good literacy program."
Not just
Um,
literacy, they have the best health program in the world. Cuban health statistics are better than the United States, and probably 2% of the expenses.
wow.
And
And
their people,
their medical training, I think, is free also.
the
Their medical school.
internationalists, it's the one country in the world that believes in genuine internationalism. So they have thousands of doctors all over in the most difficult places. Not just now, this has been going on for a long time. And remember, it's not just a poor country, it's crushed under the American jackboot constantly. Hideous sanctions, murderous sanctions. They're showing the whole world you're a bunch of, you're a bunch of total jerks. We're the only sane country.
And I know you'd mentioned Brazil too.
Brazil is
He's sort
horrible.
of the lunatic of the South. You were saying.
Well, just a couple days ago, there was a study released by Brazilian scientific uh, uh, institutions claiming, assessing the coronavirus effect on Brazil, they concluded that the reported death rate is 1/12 of the actual death rate.
Oh, wow.
Talk about China underestimating.
In the favelas, I guess it must
Oh,
be.
beyond belief. I mean, they're supposed to wash their hands. They don't have any water. They're supposed to, you know, isolate yourself when 20 people are living in a room. You know. Actually, it's very interesting in Brazil. There is an organization that's trying to bring some semblance of health, uh, proper health behavior to the favelas. You know who it is?
No.
It's the crime gangs that
Oh.
terrorize the favelas. They're so strong the police are afraid to go in. Now they're the ones who are imposing health standards. Tells you something about the world.
I was also thinking about like how's this impacting Gaza, for example?
Oh God, I don't want to even think about it. I mean, there are a couple of cases in Gaza. So far, it's controlled, but if it gets out of control, it's mind-boggling.
Because that's sort of like a
Same,
open air
same is
prison.
happening to other poor communities. So, for example, in Canada, which has a pretty bad record, not as bad as the United States, but bad, the indigenous population, the First Nations, don't have any doctors and medical assistants.
Yeah.
So they've appealed to Cuba to help them, and Cuba agreed. Canadian government blocked it.
Wow.
We can't accept help from Cuba. They're communists. The United States will get angry.
Wow.
So therefore, let the indigenous communities die off. That's Canada, our civilized neighbor.
You in one of the talks, you were talking about a progressive international movement that would maybe the only.
It's going to have its first opening meeting, I think, in November.
Oh, this is an actual organization.
It's being formed.
Oh,
It was
okay.
initiated by Sanders and Yanis Varoufakis. It's being prepared, but the first international conference is scheduled for sometime in November.
You were giving I guess about 100 talks a year all over the world.
No,
Would you say? How is it now? Like now you're.
it's worse. It's constant, and you know the technology is not all that great. So sometimes it's like our try yesterday. The thing just doesn't work. But and it's you know it's difficult, and I'm not a 25 years old anymore, so
Yeah.
it's kind of wearing. Which reminds me, I've got to get off. Got another interview coming at 3.
Wow, you stay jam-packed. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay,
It's a great honor to talk to you.
great to talk to you.
Try to stay safe
Are
in
you
there.
doing okay?
What's that? Thanks so much, Noam.
Okay.
All
See you
right.
later.
Bye.